Welcome to Global E-commerce Leaders Podcast. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I am Jim Okamura.
Kate, welcome to the Global E-commerce Leaders Forum Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
Well, thanks for joining Jim and I. And where are we finding you today?
I am in Arlington, Virginia, which is just outside of the nation's capital here, Washington, D.C.
All right. Well, welcome again. Tell us briefly a little bit about yourself. What's your background? And a little bit about IMAG. Jim's got some more in-depth questions coming up a bit later. We're very excited to have you on the mic. So who are you and what do you do for a living? And a little bit of your background and then a little bit about IMAG just to set the foundation for the listeners.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Well, my name is Kate Muth. I am the executive director of the International Mailers Advisory Group, or IMAG, as we're better known. Actually got my start in this industry as a trade reporter. I was a reporter who covered the Postal Service, covered the business of mailing and shipping, covered the Universal Postal Union and sort of cross-border in that context. And then kind of switched to, I joke that I managed to get into two dying industries in a single job, journalism and mailing, but they've both morphed into something else. And so
both
now
resilient.
Yep, that's right. So now I'm switched over kind of to the trade association side of things about 15 years ago. Worked for a domestic trade association, Postcom, which is very well known in the U.S. And then I think it's been about 12 or 13 years I've been doing IMAG as the executive director.
Great. And scope of scale of the membership, would they be global? Are they mostly U.S. based?
They are, good question, because we are, most of them are U.S. based, although they are global, have global reach, of course, and they're service providers primarily, or technology companies, platforms, consolidators that help the brands and online retailers ship across borders, whether that's inbound to the U.S. or outbound. We do have a handful of members based in the U.K. We have a couple of members in Canada, but all of them, for the most part, have a presence in the U.S. of some kind, either inbound or outbound from the U.S.
Okay, well, Kate, it's great to have you on the mic here today, and I wanted to thank you personally for being a strong community partner, to the Global E-commerce Leaders Forum. As we've gotten to know each other and kind of realize the overlap of our communities, really, I think we've sought opportunities to share insights and really opportunities to network. That's why we're really happy to have you join us here today. And, we hope that this becomes a somewhat regular segment on our Guelph podcast. We've been talking, obviously, around, a lot of the regulatory change that's been happening that you are staying, closely on top of. Can you elaborate a little bit in terms of your mandate, at IMAG and how you're really supporting, those members, and maybe, shout out a couple of those members just to give, some context of, who you're working with.
Right. Yeah. That's always dangerous to shout out one or two members, right? But I will, I think because some of them well, Jim, and they have been, I think, supporters of some of the Guelph and opportunities or community gatherings. I think ePost Global and Ascendia and Sky Postal. And we have, as I mentioned, a few members in the UK, Starlinks, Global, UKP, Hurricane. We have Zonos, and we have the platforms Etsy, eBay, and Amazon. So I apologize that I can't list them all, but you can find the members on our website. And so really our mandate is we're a little bit of a trade association that's a little bit clubby at times, in the sense that you can only be a member if you're a service provider. We focus really on policy and regulatory issues. I'm not a lobbyist, but I do obviously keep them very aware of what's going on Capitol Hill and the federal agencies. And it's really about education, information, and advocacy, in the sense of trying to make those connections within postal administrations, within the agencies, and making sure that members are aware of all of the coming changes and how to adapt. And I would say, and then of course, they're welcome to use what we provide as an association to educate their customers and their clients, because one of the things that my members tell me is most important is managing expectations. So you may not be able, for instance, on the tariffs, right, on the IEEPA tariffs that took effect, as an association, we weren't going to go in there and, tell the White House and make any changes to it. Of course, like that's something that's not only outside of our scope, but was probably not doable, even if we were, a big heavy hitter association. But we were able to educate and keep members informed so that they could manage expectations and let their own customers be aware. And we see that in particular with service issues or when there's issues with airlift, as we had during COVID and the shutdown of a lot of transportation, passenger flights internationally. Consolidators want to be able to tell their customers, listen, there's no lift or there's limited lift going into the Mideast right now. So you need to expect a longer time for your packages to arrive or your packages to even clear customs, or there's a customs issue in Brazil or something like that. So it's a way to help them educate and manage expectations. And then we do work on the global stage. We're very, as a small association, we actually have quite a large presence and voice at the Universal Postal Union, as that's opened up to the private sector through the consultative committee. I would say to describe IMAG, and I've heard others say this, we sort of punch above our weight. Small, but well known, and I think fairly well respected in the sense that we are sharing very good information. Often, sometimes it's the only place that folks are getting it, and then giving you the tools to kind of go and be an advocate for yourself as well.
Small but mighty. I love associations like yours because you're really there's no hidden agenda. The mandate is to serve and inform the members, and I being on the other side of many of those conversations, you really appreciate someone who's in your corner and just is kind of trying to provide you just the facts as we see them. So I can appreciate how the IMAG members would appreciate your work. Now, how would you characterize market conditions for global trade, including global e-commerce, over the past 2 years? I mean, there's headline stories, Freedom Day, de minimis, IEEPA tariffs, Supreme Court decisions, and refunds. But, maybe it's a tall ask, but how would you characterize the past 2 years in terms of how your members are thinking about global trade and e-commerce?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. It's sort of a tough question to answer because you listed all of the challenges and the difficulties, but I think it also really highlights the importance of the current economy, the current upheaval in global e-commerce has really highlighted the need to have good service providers, to have good for the brands in particular, and probably not to have just one service provider, right? To be sure that you're using a number of, whether that's in delivery or in technology, and then the importance of having good data. So I think it's really highlighted the importance of having strong partners that can help you navigate these very muddy waters, or very choppy waters. I guess they're muddy too. They're muddy too. Right. And I was just,
can we use the word treacherous, right? Waters? Can we
treacherous
use that
waters? In these uncertain times, right? We see that a lot in advertising. Yeah. But I'll say there's a few things that I spoke at a conference, or I was a moderator, and they asked me just to tee up a few things. And I think one of the really big challenges that's been overlooked is how much sort of the global cost of conflicts, the impact of conflicts and war on the supply chains. It is one of the biggest macroeconomic risks for those of us in the global supply chain business, but it also impacts capital flows, and it also hurts consumer confidence. So in addition to kind of having to reroute or have a shutdown in air traffic or reduced air traffic to certain countries, we have to worry a lot about consumer confidence. And I don't know that there's much that one can do about that other than to be a really good service provider. And if they order something, the expectation that it'll be there in 5, 6, 7 days, if you're going around the world, that you meet those expectations, or you allow for the visibility that lets them see why something isn't reaching its destination.
Well, it's such a great point. I mean, it all started, I guess, in this recent time with the Ukraine war, which has probably rerouted planes for 4 or 5 years, right, about where they can travel. And we seem to hear today, we're recording this mid-June, that some resolution is coming in the Strait of Hormuz. Now, I was talking to retailers last week, and their expectation is that while there may be a drop suddenly in the price of diesel or whatever at the market rate, that these disruptions from a fuel price surcharge will last for the rest of 2026. Do you guys have a perspective on that, or how do you think about or just wait and see like the rest of us?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of wait and see. I think it's sort of, preparing for the worst, just holding on to some optimism, but sort of preparing for the worst in some ways. I think the other difficulty is that you see a rise in even something like postage rates and things like that. And I guess the one, if you're an exporter from the US and the dollar is weak, that helps a little bit. But then again, there's all of these other uncertainties in the market. And, when we talk a little bit about the tariffs and trade agreements, and, I think we have to acknowledge that the U.S. is a little bit of an unreliable partner right now. And so that really hurts confidence, not just of consumers, but of the businesses that are kind of walking into these arrangements and negotiations.
It's why we at Guelph, have been really focusing on the partner ecosystems that it really takes for any retailer or global consumer brand to really accomplish what they're setting out to do on an international stage, right? And I think that's why what you're doing with IMAG to inform some of these really important ecosystem partners to the global brands and retailers, I think it is just sort of part of what we've seen with the localization of inventory, for example, as opposed to those kind of consumer-based packages crossing border. We're seeing much more investment on the part of like big global brands. So these are the things that I think are really running through the minds of a lot of our community members. And so just kind of seeing these perspectives change. Let's talk a little bit about this year and what's been happening. Where are we at? What is happening with the tariff refunds, or IEPA refunds, as often referred to? What's your perspective on this at this point?
Yeah, that one's a lot going on just in the last couple of weeks. So first phase of the IEPA refunds has been underway. CBP, Customs and Border Protection, has developed a system to begin processing the refunds for just a limited, they're calling it phase one, and it's limited to certain unliquidated entries and liquidated entries within 80 days. Now, I understand that there was a hearing last week, and from that, CBP has committed to phase two, which would be liquidated entries that have where the importer has filed suit. So I think there's still, the CBP, or the administration, the Trump administration, has challenged the nationwide injunction that the Court of International Trade issued, saying anyone who paid IEPA refunds paid IEPA tariffs deserves a refund. And essentially, what the administration is challenging is if you haven't filed a suit in court for your refund, and you're not in one of these sort of first two categories of the unliquidated and the recently liquidated, you don't deserve a refund, essentially. So that's going to be challenged that'll be something that the Federal Court of Appeals sorts out. But it leaves a lot of folks, so a lot of my members who paid the duties, imported, came in through a postal shipment, and there was a whole system sort of created for that because CBP didn't have a way to sort of remit and collect on postal shipments. So there was a special system set up with these qualified parties. Well, CBP's kind of saying, we don't really have a way to pay those back. And oh, by the way, it was a third party that paid them, so the money won't actually get back to, the refund wouldn't actually get back to the ultimate entity that sent the goods. So that's a big question mark. And my members are quite concerned because, even though it's probably the smallest amount of the inbound shipments, it's still millions and millions of dollars. So there's a lot of question marks around IEPA. I think a lot of that will be sorted when the Federal Court of Appeals takes up the administration's challenge to it.
I was talking with, one of the Guelph global brands and how they were really counting on, some of those tariff refunds to really fund the programs, through the balance of the year. In our discussion, certainly, the end result was, stay on top of this, right? Is that basically your advice, to others, whether it's, your members or their customers, in this case?
Yeah, this is a tough one because I'm not a customs broker and I'm not an attorney, so I'm always reluctant to give advice on this. But there is, I think, even within the legal camp, is at the time there was a sort of a split. Should you file suit just to protect yourself, right, in case something like this happens? And others are like, well, no, the Supreme Court said, everyone who paid IEEPA tariffs gets a refund. I think there's probably the sense that you're safer if you filed suit in the Court of International Trade, but that's just maybe not possible for everyone. But yeah, I think the key is to stay on top of it and to, if you have a customs broker, if you have a legal trade lawyer, these are the people you really need to be reaching out to for a little more guidance as well.
We'll talk about some of the looming changes in the European Union shortly, but for our Gulf community, are there other regulatory changes that you think are important, for Gulf, members to be aware of, things that have happened, perhaps earlier this year, and then we'll kind of talk later more about what's coming down the line.
Yeah, I think, I'm going to answer that one on the inbound side first, because you said that your European Union we'll tackle in a minute. But there is something that's coming very, very soon, but it also kind of touches back on tariffs as well. So when the Supreme Court ruled that the IEEPA tariffs were unlawful, the administration put in place what's called Section 122 tariffs to try to sort of recover, what they were losing from IEEPA. Now, those only have 150-day, they can only be implemented for 150 days, and that 150 days ends on July 24th. So what we're expecting, and this kind of ties in with kind of what we're expecting from the Customs and Border Protection to issue, I would say in the next week, what they call an interim final rule. So it's a rulemaking that takes effect very soon. So unlike a traditional proposed rulemaking, there's a comment period, and then there's some consideration, and then a final rule comes out with a later implementation date. With an interim final rule, essentially the rule is out with an effective date of 30 days is what we're hearing. And this will essentially create parity for duty treatment in the postal and commercial channel. It's going to require some more data elements from postal shipments as well. It's the first step in trying to bring parity between commercial and postal clearance, which, as I mentioned, had some differences because CBP couldn't accept postal shipments through its automated system. So that's coming, and we expect the timing to be such that it takes effect July 24th when the Section 122 tariffs end. And then there's also the U.S. Trade Representative is proposing tariffs on under the Section 301 part of the Trade Act. And the timing around that seems all kind of headed towards this July 24th date as well. So it's both kind of tariffs and new data requirements and some new requirements potentially in the commercial environment. I'm not exactly sure if cargo will have some changes as well, but we're eagerly awaiting that much anticipated ruling because it was supposed to be out a month or so ago with a 60-day implementation date, but now it's not going to be out until probably next week with only 30 days before implementation, which is not a lot of time for people to get ready.
So over and above Europe, what other changes are you looking at globally that you're keeping on tabs? There's a review period coming up for Canada. That's probably about to be on your radar screen. You got a long queue there of things to try to pay attention to. But anything else that you'd want to tell our listeners about? Well,
you did mention Canada, so we'll have what we call the USMCA, and you call the
CUSMA.
And so I believe July 1st is when that process starts again for a review of the agreement. We just, finally got through a year and a half of unrest with Canada Post. They've reached agreement with their union, and that has been ratified by the rank and file. So at least there's a little bit of certainty there, but Canada Post is in a world of hurt as well. And so, Canada as one of the biggest destinations for my members is always on our radar screen. And we'll be sort of refocusing there once we kind of get through the European Union changes, which unfortunately are July 1st. And then again, there's some other changes on November 1st. So it'll just be I just put out a little infographic that basically says none of us will be able to take a vacation this summer as we get ready for all of this.
Well, let's just hope we can cross the brand new Gordie Howe Bridge. That is a wonderful bridge connecting our two great nations. Add that to your list of moving goods from place to place as well.
Exactly. And as someone who grew up a Hartford Whalers fan, I know Gordie Howe well. So, yeah.
Excellent. A great Canadian who spent all of his career in Detroit, too. Kate, listen, this has been great. Thanks so much for joining us. And again, as Jim said, thanks for being such a great supporting member of our community. Now, if folks want to get in touch with you, perhaps learn more about your association, how do they do that?
Well, they can find me on LinkedIn and send me a direct message. And our website is imag.world, which is also something that will show all of my members and some of the work that we're doing. Well, once again, on behalf of Jim and I, thanks so much for joining us, the Global E-commerce Leaders Forum podcast, and thanks for sharing your insights. I'd love to have you back. I mean, it's like a moment in time. Maybe we'll have you back next week. Things move pretty fast. Right, exactly. As you say, no rest for our community over the summer, but it's interesting, never boring. So once again, thanks for helping us sort it all out. Thank you so much. It's my pleasure.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure and give us that 5-star rating and follow us on your favorite podcast platform, and check out our newly refreshed YouTube and LinkedIn pages.